All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the July session of the Microsoft 365 Meetup for Government. Very excited for tonight's panel discussion and presentation. We will be just going through a few brief announcements and then transitioning over and spending the preponderance of the time on our panel discussion. So big thanks to our panelists as well as our moderator, Andrew Kagan. And then once we wrap up with everybody's questions, we'll close out a few administrative notes and then be done for the evening. So for those who are new to our community, this community was founded to help facilitate learning, professional development, networking, and other knowledge sharing around Microsoft 365 and its applications for use in the public sector and government space. We have some pretty basic community standards. This is really intended to be a professional but fun forum. So please be respectful and considerate to others. Please do not share any information that is non-public, proprietary, or in other ways controlled. We encourage members, if they have a promotion, whether it be a personal promotion or as part of their business, that is allowed. However, we ask that people be judicious and not abuse the privilege. And it is very important to call out that everyone who is here, whether it be government employees, Microsoft employees, other partners, are here in their personal capacity, and their views and opinions reflect only themselves and not the organization, which may be their employer. I want to thank my two co-community organizers, Andrew Kagan and Andy Oak from Planet Technologies, who without them, this session with community would not be possible. So big thanks to both of them. And for those who don't know me, I'm Nick Giard. I'm a program manager with the Office 365 Gov team. So if you're interested, feel free to add me to social media. But enough about me. So if you're new to Teams, just want to call out a few things, kind of the pre-flight safety briefing. So probably the most important thing to know is where the mute button is. And also, since we will be doing this discussion in a moderated fashion, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat or use the raise hand in icon, and we will call on you as soon as we get to a good point. So you can find the raise hand by the little smiley face with the hand that's upraised. If for whatever reason you're having trouble with the audio via your computer, you can also dial in via the information that's included below. If you are interested in being a presenter at a future session, we are always looking for contributions from our community or other speakers. So feel free to submit your content idea through our call for content form. But even more important, we really would like to get feedback from everyone who's a participant, both for the individual sessions and speakers and content that we're talking about, as well as what we continue to do, what folks are interested in terms of content for future sessions, and how the group is either valuable to you or any constructive criticism is welcome. So please take the time to fill out the feedback form. I will be putting the link in the chat as we get started. So without further ado, I want to turn things over to our moderator, Andrew Kagan. So Andrew, please take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Nick. Hello, all. I'm Andrew Kagan, Planet Technologies CTO, a co-organizer of this great meetup. And for the purposes of this discussion, I will be moderating this wonderful panel. Those who know me personally may kind of notice that I sound slightly different. I'm a little bit under the weather, but I just could not allow a possibility of missing this exciting panel. So I'm here, and I would like to start, before we even give an introduction to the subject matter, with a quick introduction of our distinguished panelists. I will introduce them, let them introduce themselves the way they actually appear on the screen here for me. And as you guys do, could you please also add like one absolutely top things that is top of mind for you, cybersecurity wise, for 2021? So Vishal, why won't you take it away?
Wonderful. Good evening, everyone. My name is Vishal. I lead our cybersecurity, compliance, and identity business, and many of the individuals that work directly with your organizations on our team. So it's a pleasure to be here and contribute to the panel. I'll keep it short. One of the things that I'm looking forward to in this upcoming year, especially with our federal and regulated industry organizations, is partnering better with all of you to find a way to integrate all of your security solutions into more of a platform approach to make it simpler to manage and really take advantage of all of that telemetry so that you can actually do your jobs and protect and serve our country and our best interests. My background, I'm a 21-year public servant myself prior to coming to the industry, and really look forward to working with all of you and your teams in the future. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you. Steve Winter.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andrew. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. My name is Steve Winter. I'm the Executive Vice President in charge of sales strategy, execution, and standardized delivery at Planet Technologies. I've had the great fortune to know many of the folks on this panel and feel honored to be able to share this platform with them. Andrew, I think one of the things that I'm so excited about talking to our customers and our customer partners about right now, and really ties into the executive order, is not just securing these IT networks, but securing these OT networks. That's one of the things that I'm really excited about, and I think is such an overlooked area, and especially, and it is absolutely covered within the EO as well. So, we might get to that tonight, but that's one of my passionate areas for discussion these days.
Well, that's an excellent point. I appreciate, Steve, you adding this to the conversation, because I think that, OT is obviously super important, and sometimes we start thinking about important things that are related to maybe our critical infrastructure, but OT may also include simple things in the office, like lighting and other smart devices that are often left unprotected. And I'm pretty sure that we're going to talk about it some more later on. Kent, if you don't mind.
Sure. Hi, thank you. My name is Kent Cunningham. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the federal civilian government space at Microsoft. And so for those of you who maybe not familiar with how Microsoft breaks that up, we kind of break it up into defense and everybody else. So we're 14 of the 15 cabinets, if you want to look at it that way. I'll be honest, Andrew, what I'm the most excited about is I would just call it the acknowledgement that piecemeal, step-by-step status quo is not going to ever catch up with the bad actors and the nation-state attacks that we have facing our nation today, and that we finally have guidance that I think starts where the front door is open, which is predominantly identity for a lot of our agencies, and walking them through the steps to create a more secure environment, and teaches them how to really learn from that data, learn from their own data, learn from others' data, and how to put that together to make decisions faster. So to me, I'm the most excited about the holistic acknowledgement that we can't piecemeal this and ever solve the problem.
Oh, that's another great point. Absolutely. I see that the panel delivering value already. I'd say that, before we start solving any problems, we need to admit that we have one. And I think we're doing it right now. So last but definitely not least, Steve.
Thanks, Andrew. Steve Faehl, Microsoft Federal Security Chief Technology Officer. And I work on security strategy for our federal customers, and also the orchestration of the security outcomes within Microsoft Federal. And so the thing that's top of mind for me is really this year simplifying cybersecurity modernization to increase agency adoption. And so many times we have conversations with agencies, and the ask is, Microsoft, can you do more? I want to modernize, I want to achieve better security outcomes, but I need some help in these particular areas. And so that's really something that we're leaning into this year. It's top of mind for us. With the cybersecurity executive order as well, it's been a great rallying point. And looking across all of Microsoft internally, there's so many teams leaning in, hundreds of engineers writing position papers for NIST. I see Carmichael's on this call, our Microsoft digital team leaning in to say these are the lessons learned in our own implementations in our digital security and risk engineering team. We have meetings monthly with 10 plus corporate vice presidents saying, let's do more. How can we do more? What can we do to really move the needle for these agencies? And I just love the energy and the mission that is realized within Microsoft to make our government clients successful. So for me, that's what's top of mind, and excited to get after it this year.
This is great. I totally agree. I think that executive order definitely is a catalyst, and let's just start discussing it, I guess, now. Just for a very quick background, I'm pretty sure that most people on this call are very familiar with the subject matter. But those who may be less familiar, I just want to remind you guys that following a string of pretty high-profile software supply chain attacks, President Biden issued a wide-ranging executive order on improving our nation's cybersecurity. It happened on May 12th of this year, and many things have already transpired, and many things are still need to happen. And as I said, I think that people on this call may have various degrees of familiarity with the subject matter. So to get us started, Kent, why don't you kind of give us a little better feel for what this executive order is, what it does. Just tell us a little bit more, what it is and who it applies to.
Sure. So, as you mentioned, it was signed on May 12th. It was actually, I'm sitting here looking at the calendar. It was hard to believe that it was, I'm going to say that long ago. But it was signed on May 12th. It did come out after a broad number of malicious cyber campaigns impacted the government companies and citizens in the U.S. Who it applies to? It applies to all federal information systems across government, and there is specific guidance for agencies within the federal civilian executive branch, intelligence communities, and the DoD. EO itself is broken up into 10 sections, 8 of which are really have unique technologies in them. Those include a section on how do we remove barriers to sharing threat information. That talks to some extent around the information that cloud providers such as Microsoft may have. Those who manage federal government networks as contractors may have, and how do we leverage the collective information that we have in these different teams, organizations, and companies better to protect the nation. There's a section on modernizing federal government cybersecurity, and it outlines changes in identity and zero trust that need to be taken, and provides timelines for achieving a zero trust a plan, a strategy within an organization. There are certainly steps to improving software supply chain security, which includes the concept of an SBOM, or a software bill of materials, to help agencies understand what software is in their software, which is certainly a critical thing to understand. When you've identified that there's a vulnerability in a certain piece of code, you need to be able to know if that code's in your environment. There's a section around improving detection of vulnerabilities and incidents on federal government networks, and this focuses on things like EDR, or endpoint detection and response, cloud native SIEM capabilities, and those capabilities. And there's a section as well on improving the government's investigative and remediation capabilities. And so this provides us some updated guidance on the collection of networks logs and system logs, what to capture in across your infrastructure, how long to keep that, what to do with that. And there's going to be some additional guidance, I believe, coming out around that. So the EO is very concise. It's very well written. It has very clear timelines. But to be fair, it's 23 pages long and over 800 words. So there's a lot, I'm sorry, over 8,000 words. So there's a lot to dig through and digest as agencies take that on. And hopefully over the next hour, we'll discuss some ways that we're trying to help agencies simplify that.
All right. Well, that's a great overview, Ken. Thank you so much. Well, obviously, we're looking for audience participation. So if you guys have any questions, just please feel free to raise your hand, and also you can submit those questions through the chat. Me and my co-organizers will be watching for those questions throughout the event. But meanwhile, I have a few questions that we have gathered prior. And first one that I have, it's really to anyone who would like to answer it. Can you highlight some of the things that this executive order changes? What are some new things that it introduces as far as cybersecurity approaches are concerned? Policy changes, anything that drastically changes cybersecurity posture. Once again, guys, feel free to take it on. Anyone?
Sure, I'll jump in, Andrew. I'll definitely jump in on this. I also just want to kind of tag onto this, just the scope of what Kent was mentioning. It is a really expansive document. There is a ton of content in it. And the way that I think about this, I had a good analogy, I think 2 weeks ago, when my wife said to me, we should really replace the floor in the living room. And so we're like, okay, we need to replace the floor in the living room. Sounds simple enough. Sounds like that's a very doable project. The problem is, if we replace the floor in the living room, it's not going to match the floor in the kitchen. So now we need to replace the floor in the kitchen. Now that we do that, the cabinets aren't going to match the new floor. So we need to replace the cabinets, which means we need to replace the countertops. We also need to replace the steps, because now the steps don't match the floor. So we kind of went through this exercise and basically figured out that we need to replace everything. And that's the way I think about trying to get after the supply chain problem. It is a very difficult, complex problem, and all of the pieces are interconnected. So I get a lot of questions about, why is the cybersecurity executive order so complicated? It's because they're all connected. All those pieces, what it takes to raise the bar for a security baseline, and what it takes to really start to put the building blocks in place to get after supply chain, is pretty extensive, right? So are we going to solve supply chain with this? No, we're not. But are we going to put the building blocks in place? We definitely hope so. So I think that's one of the things, just to think holistically. The EO seems fragmented, like it's addressing a number of things, but they're all building blocks to a bigger outcome. And I don't expect this to be the last cybersecurity executive order. So to answer your question on which key things are introduced, I think for me, what stood out was this is really an emphasis on the idea of critical software is now emerging. And so we've talked about critical infrastructure. We've talked about software as it pertains to critical infrastructure. But this was the first time that prominently critical software was a focus, at least that I've seen. The policy folks may be able to point out 3 others to me that I missed, but for me, this was really that call out to say there's a realization at the foundation that there is software that is critical to digital transformation and to the running of organizations, to the running of government, to providing services to citizens, to providing national defense. And we need to have a special category of software that fits that bill. NIST has done a fantastic job marking out what the attributes of critical software is. DHS working on the list of critical software. And so I think that's really one of the key things moving forward. We'll see more and more mention of critical software, building on the work that NIST has done, and more requirements around that. And those requirements are really for agency configuration, for agency diligence around the security controls for critical software, the way it's managed, the way it's maintained, the way it's monitored. All of those pieces really come to bear around the security measures for critical software. NTIA also putting together SBOM requirements. We now have a minimum bar of when people say SBOM, according to NTIA, it must be this plus. And so I think that's a fantastic step forward for the industry. And really looking at incident notification, that's probably the third area, to say that CSPs and technology providers have a distinct responsibility when it comes to notifying the government around cybersecurity incidents. Just great to have some of that framework outlined as well. And I think the final piece, I could go on for forever apparently, but the final piece that I would call out is there's an underlying emphasis that modernization is security. And so the idea is, as you modernize, that is a step in the right direction for security. And then in that modernization move, that cloud is the first and best step. That based on the shared responsibility model, modernizing via cloud is the fastest way to improve your security posture.
Indeed. Yeah, Steve, one of the things I think is really interesting tied to this, Steve, as well, of course, is the sort of gold stamp of approval that's going to somehow be tied to contracts and procurements as well, as a way of, as they say in the EO, sort of incentivizing industry to participate in this where they don't have control at the federal government level. I think that's, obviously a very interesting way, and I love the terminology incentivize for sure.
True. Yes. Thank you, Steve's. I think that it's actually awesome to highlight the fact that, while by government standards, 23-page document is not particularly long, I think the issue that it's trying to address, the, security of software supply chain and, critical software is extremely complex. So quite often, people sort of get, disheartened. They don't really know where to begin. So I thought I would ask the next question of Vishal. If I'm an organization that is using already parts of Office 365, let's say for collaboration, email, file sharing, online meetings, and so on and so forth, where do I start? Are there any certain approaches that I can begin with? How do I prioritize things, sequence them right direction, in right direction, and also do what Steve just said? It's a complex issue. We need to break it down. We need to identify the priorities. We need to start from simple and then to move to more complex. What do I do?
That's a great question. That's a question that we're all hearing. And the great thing about that question is we're all at different maturity levels. I want to take a step back real quick and acknowledge the fact that, the EO shares with us that the secure path to building this strategy around security needs to be cloud first, right? Cloud centric. And I think I want to call that out initially because for those of you that are already Microsoft customers, already utilizing our email, already utilizing our MDM solutions, our compliance solutions, turning on Sentinel, utilizing those pieces, you're already there. And I think that's key to call out. The timeline that comes out, put some things in the sand and makes us kind of adhere to different requirements. But for those of you that are already Microsoft customers, start with the basics. And I think the basics there are really enforcing things like MFA, right? Identifying and monitoring those risks. That's key. And that message hasn't changed in years. Steve, you mentioned enabling, our non-government partners, right, around the EO. And it's not even Microsoft that's been saying this. I mean, even organizations like Planet and other organizations, these are the first things that we do when we get into our government, our regulated industry customers, is we identify and monitor those risks. So enforcing MFA, right? So enabling single sign-on. I mean, from there, you utilize our tools like Azure Active Directory. And if you have your own identity solution, bring that to the table, right? And let us or your organization or your partner organization work with that, assess it, and then move from there. I think step 2 there is establishing that risk prioritized action workflow, right? And that's where we started kind of leaning into some of our cloud-based solutions like Sentinel, right? Our SIM, and some of those other pieces where you could start tying in and utilizing a lot of that telemetry. But let these cloud-based tools work for you, right? But very simply, Andrew, I think starting with enforcing MFA, starting with that whole identity piece is key to this whole EO, right? Start there if you haven't started there already, especially our existing customers.
That's a great point. I think those simple things can definitely go a long way. And Steve Winter, I just wanted to kind of have you piggyback on this based on extensive work we've been doing with a whole range of customers, from federal customers to some of the DIB customers, trying to help them position themselves to increase their security posture. You want to add something to this?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a couple different notions here going on. I mean, if you listen to what Vishal said, you listen to what Steve Faehl said, you actually read the order, there is a notion of sort of simplifying it, right? Like, what are the things that we can do? What are the things we can do quickly to create a much better security position right off the bat? And so obviously conditional access, which is inclusive of MFA, which is going to be inclusive of identity, which is going to be inclusive of making sure we understand the health of those things that are entering our network, entering our now soft perimeters, if you will. Of course, in endpoints and making sure we understand the health of our endpoints and this notion of single identity. I think there are some sort of simple steps that we can take in that, as Vishal said, but if we just take a big step back from that and we just assume breach, if we start at the notion of assuming breach, then we're going to end up at, can we do both? Can we sort of be super tactical and attack the simple pieces that we sort of laid out, while at the same time understanding we're going to assume breach and start looking at zero trust a little bit more holistically from the very beginning? Can we actually accomplish both? Can we assess where we are in zero trust at the same time doing simple things? I think the answer to that is yes, because in the sort of roadmap of building a ramp or building a plan around zero trust, looking at the 6 different layers, we can check off the things that we've already done, while looking forward at the same time. And Microsoft has put together, I think, a great roadmap for that. For those who have seen it, it's sort of a three-phased approach. And I don't think actually the word zero trust is actually in the approach. I don't think, but if you look at it, it really does encompass everything that you're going to want to do on that journey in three different phases. And that's up on Microsoft's site for federal, and I've been really impressed with that. But that would be my suggestion. Hey, and that's what we're seeing in the marketplace. Let's attack those simple things because we need to assume breach and we want to get something done now. But at the same token, we understand there's a plan that we have to develop at the same time, and we can do both.
Andrew, I'd like to just add a little bit to what Steve has said there. So when this thing first happened, I believe Vishal and Steve and I were probably on the phone basically immediately. And the discussion became, how do we help customers and meet them where they are? How do we not recommend 3,000 products to do this, and say, how do we meet this the most effectively, both cost effectively and operationally? We have built a series of frameworks that I would encourage those who are Microsoft customers to engage their account teams on. Those series of frameworks walk through different sections of the EO. Some people will say, well, have those been posted? And the answer to that is no, because we want to have an architecture discussion with you to understand where you are. But there are some cases where you can start with what's right online. I think the first timeline, if I remember correctly, was to document a zero trust architecture. We do have a zero trust architecture center on the Microsoft site, which outlines the different capabilities of zero trust. We also have a gentleman who has presented at other meetups, specifically the Azure meetup, on a zero trust workbook, or we sometimes call it the TIC 3.0 workbook, that is built right into Azure. We'll show you all the different products, all the different capabilities that the NIST framework outlines for zero trust, how the different products map to those, and what you might consider from a configuration perspective. And so everything from those of us in the field to building capabilities directly in the products to creating documentation that aligns to the EO and to the outcomes, we're trying to make sure that we provide as much of that as possible. And we're also empowering our customer success unit and our STU teams and even our fast track teams to help customers get started as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible.
Excellent. So Steve, Ken, thank you. I think you gave a pretty good overview of what's sort of available and how to get started. Steve Faehl, do you have anything to add in terms of any kind of published Microsoft guidance that is specific to helping organizations move towards complying with this executive order as it relates to Microsoft's platforms and technologies, and help them plan and execute on it?
Absolutely. So Randy had just asked a question in the chat around where is the three-phased approach that Steve Winter mentioned. So I put the link into the chat. It is aka.ms/cyberEO. And that is our CyberEO landing page for Microsoft Federal. It's about to get a refresh, a V2, and we'll keep publishing resources there, especially as the various timelines for adoption for each agency become due. And there are specific milestones. We'll have guidance ahead of time related to that specific milestone. We're building out not only reference architectures, but also implementation guides. So keep visiting back to that page. We will have more and more resources over time. Our blog posts that give specific guidance will also be posted there. So that is the single place that you can go to. There are many, many assets that we're working on landing over time. I would also point out that we're doing some work with NIST around SP 1800, the cybersecurity practices that will be published around zero trust. And so we will share those through NIST as well, based on that collaboration. And I also want to make a point based on the previous talk track. We were talking on the modernization of security and talking about, what can I do based on what I already have. Also, don't forget to call out the victories that you've already won. And so when we look at organizations, talking about their zero trust profile, talking about modernization and supply chain security, for example, if you've made a migration to Exchange Online, that is a significant step in the right direction for modernization. And it's one that many agencies overlook. It's something maybe they did 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and they're not calling that out in their action plan. Definitely claim the victories too, not just the work that you have to do next. I would challenge, anyone that's not on Exchange Online right now, what version of Exchange are you running? And so if you're running Exchange on premises, it is a real challenge to stay up to date. It is a real challenge to keep vulnerabilities at bay with any software that you're responsible for updating yourself. It's a constant battle. It's a constant uphill battle. And so just a very simple example, moving to Exchange Online, huge step forward, as we saw with the previous Exchange vulnerabilities a few months ago. It took organizations some time to patch. In the cloud world, we were able to patch the vulnerabilities prior to disclosure. So that's the best position to be in, is in a cloud world where the provider can really adopt that improved security posture for you. And that can happen rapidly. And then, of course, transparency and communication surrounding all of that, which the executive order speaks to as well. So don't forget to call out the victories.
Absolutely. And those are super important points. I think you made them once or twice already, Steve. I think it's the fact that we need to modernize, we need to embrace the cloud, and we definitely need to reduce the surface of the technical debt. And that will, hopefully get us, pretty far ahead in terms of, being able to secure the environments. We do observe that a lot of our customers, generally speaking, especially in the public sector space, already adopted like Office 365, M365 to a large degree. It's becoming sort of a baseline. They already moved up to something like E3, G3 type of platform, and they're already enjoying all of those like additional benefits that cloud technologies, evergreen solutions bring. But the question then is, Vishal, maybe you can answer. Is this baseline enough, whatever is contained within E3 G5 license suite, to meet the EO requirements, or is there something beyond that customers need to look into and implement in order to meet
it? They're similar to what I said before, and I could tag in my peers here on the back end of this, is many of you own it. And I think if you look at what you own right now, more than just owning it, what we've really tried to focus on over the last year is how they integrate together. So when you look at where we've come as an organization, when you look at our EDR, for example, it's now, the forefront of, all of our studies that we're coming out with. It's an industry-leading EDR. So if you're looking at what you already own, are they enough? They can be, but it's how you tie them together. It's how you mesh them together. One of the common questions we're getting in response to the EO with many of the organizations that everyone here is part of is, hey, I've got all my Microsoft solutions, I've got all of the stack here, but I need something else to protect all my other cloud solutions, all my everything on premise, everything on premises, everything hybrid. One of the things that we like to share now is, Microsoft security is not just built for Microsoft, right? It extends out into other pieces of your environment, and you can adopt in your framework. When I encourage organizations to start looking at things like data discovery, right? When we look at classification and protection, the multi-factor authentication piece is huge. And then when we get into the endpoint detection and response, you can start really utilizing what we have to tie into other pieces of our platform, like Sentinel. Right. And then you can start looking at XDR capabilities we have at Microsoft as well when we start talking about 365 Defender or Azure Defender. So when we're really extending outside of Microsoft and really trying to come to you to see how to fit into your environment. So if you are already a Microsoft customer and you're already an Azure customer, you're probably there. Right. I would encourage the team to reach out to your account teams, reach out to your partners to say, help me integrate all of this together. And how does this align to, what we are trying to accomplish? How does this meet, our zero trust objectives? Because most likely you have all the tools in place. It's just connecting them together. Maybe Ken or Ken or Steve may have something to add on to that.
If you guys do, please feel free to add to it. So far, I hear like at least three very repetitive themes so far. It's about modernizing, it's about simplifying, and it's about integrating. Right, you got to have a comprehensive approach. So
yeah,
do you guys have anything to add?
Too, right, Andrew? I mean, it's a reoccurring theme that we are moving into this cloud native approach, and we traditionally have never been there. So the acknowledgement of this, and then to know that you've been there already, you're already there. Most of our government organizations are already in Office 365 in some facet. So you're already utilizing the power of the cloud to move your mission forward. Now it's just about taking all of that and connecting it to some of these more advanced tools and things that you have available to you. And that's really where that XDR story enriches and comes to life. I think the security architectures that Kent mentioned, you'll see that, right? We've really tried to give you the scenarios that may be applicable to you, very, a lot easier to swallow, to show you that, hey, if you just piece these things together, you're going to see how they achieve, what's outlined to you in the EO. So I really encourage, I think we have 5 scenarios, right, Kent, Steve, out of the security architectures?
Yes.
Well, this is great, and I think that the integration and connectivity and simplification is definitely key. As just like as one of the examples, as Vishal, you were talking, I just remember that just this morning I think I've read about some newer high-level technologies such as Sentinel and Azure Defender, for example, now have a bidirectional integration, meaning that alerts are being raised and resolved, and information is available going both ways. And if you resolve it in one of the consoles, that can potentially flow and resolve it in another, which simplifies things greatly and makes things much more connected in a security world, which I think will be viewed as a huge plus by security teams and IT teams in general.
It allows us to take products and move them into actual objectives like operational technology, right? And it's a big focus this year. It's not just talking about Azure Defender, not just talking about Sentinel, but how do we tie in OT into these product suites and make it tangible?
Operationalizing.
At that point also, Vishal, as we look at specific workloads that are catered specifically to satisfy results in the EO, maybe even in a unique way, I think about Defender for Endpoint and the EDR requirements. Many organizations that already have G5, E5, they have it on the workstation side, but they haven't gotten coverage for their servers with an Azure Defender or with a Defender for Endpoint. And so rounding it out to satisfy the requirements of the EO with the same technology you're using to protect your workstations means you're going to have that consistent telemetry across the board on all of the endpoints, regardless of what OS, regardless of what the scenario is, you have the same telemetry. And then we look at other requirements for centralized logging and visibility at the highest level of an agency. So, thinking about every silo within an agency that has their own logging solution, that has their own admin team, their own cyber team, how do we bubble that up for compliance with the EO so that the highest level agency now has visibility? But we don't want to lose the ability to respond within individual silos underneath the agency. So that's been a centralized versus distributed, debate that's gone on for a very long time. It's landed different ways inside of the federal government, but now introducing that coordination between Defender for Endpoint and Sentinel, you can put your Defender for Endpoint telemetry into Sentinel and then use a feature called Lighthouse, Azure Lighthouse, to look across multiple Sentinel environments, where at the topmost agency, you can do a query across distributed data sets just with some simple identity work that takes a couple of minutes. And so instead of passing data around, duplicating data, aggregating data, all of the historical pain that's been involved in that to get a centralized view, you now have the ability to have a centralized view of decentralized data. And I think that's really an enabler for agencies to save money and to have this consistent look and feel across all the various products.
And so, Andrew, I think when you start talking about, and back to the question of sort of like what to do, right? What the question is, all of these great tools are out there, but you were sort of going there in your last comment, Andrew, like the whole operationalizing of all of these things obviously is critical. At some point, these tools have to become real. They have to become real in your SOC, and they have to become real in terms of your organizational structure, right? In terms of, some of the points that Steve was just making. And so one of the things the EO says a lot quite a bit about is upskilling as well. So, when we actually look at how we're going to make these tools operational, we need to look at personas, which I think is something Microsoft's done really well. In our world, working with our customers, we've broken that down to roles, and in many cases, individuals to roles, and then of course evaluating what the skill gap is there. So what is the skill gap that we can actually make these tools real for these folks? Because ultimately, all the great tooling in the world isn't going to matter if we don't help them make it real, help it be something that they can operate in their environment. To that end, there's a great talk that a gentleman by the name of Dean Accavelli at Microsoft delivers, and it's called the Bits and Bots talk, which I love. And it's this notion that says that, it's not a fair fight anymore. These hackers out there, professional hackers, they go to jobs, they drive cars, they show up in suits, all of this other kind of stuff. They collect paychecks. This is what they do. It's an unfair fight. So this old notion of, hey, we're going to go and piece part all of these things together and somehow integrate them to make them work for
Steve, you're muted.
Steve, you went on mute, buddy.
I don't know why that happened, but it's an outdated notion to think that we can somehow have a fair fight unless we have some sort of platform that's integrated, that's got signals going backwards and forwards, some centralized consoles that allows us, again, to make this real and make it operational on environment. There's a state that we have worked with quite a bit, and they still argue to this day that their strength is different vendors and not being tied to one particular vendor. Again, I think that's a dangerous way of thinking in this day and age, and certainly against what the EO is trying to bring us to.
Absolutely. And I think this may be this new approach, because I think that, some of the, limited successes of the previous approaches, the CDM program, for example, quite often we got enamored by tools and platforms, and we forgot to make sure that they're actually operationalized and that they deliver value. It's not that they just in the environment, but that they deliver value. Otherwise, it all makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah, Andrew, I just want to call out, we have a number of great questions in the chat. So whenever you're ready, just let me know and we can call those out.
Absolutely. I will probably be relying on you, Nick and Andy, to help me with those questions, as I was not paying a whole lot of attention to the chat. I only have one more thing. Thank you. I only had one more thing I wanted to ask maybe Kent and Steve to elaborate on. We talked about so many good things, things that are outlined in the executive order, things that are available from Microsoft as published guidance, tools, different integrations between platforms. But quite often it comes down to.
所以这个领导说要开会商量一下。
All right.
这搞得好。
But quite often it comes down to people. And what I keep hearing, and this is a persistent rumor in the industry, is that we're short on qualified IT resources. And this is especially true when it comes to cybersecurity resources. So I was wondering if you guys can, talk a little bit about how much do you think most organizations can implement on their own, execute in-house, so to speak. And are there any specific opportunities, specific areas that you see that are maybe like more effective if outsourced?
So Andrew, it's a great question, and there are certainly agencies that are 75% of the way down this path because they've been invested and focusing on closing these gaps for quite some time. But as agencies begin to look at what's in this 8,000 word, 23-page executive order, it's the largest one that I've seen, I believe, in my 14 years of being here. As they look at this, I would encourage them not to do this on their own, regardless of their skill set. And here's the reason why. There's really two reasons why. The first is we have a variety of resources that are available to every federal government agency with an enterprise agreement, which as far as I know is every federal government agency. And that gives them access to resources free of charge who can help them understand how to implement these tools. Folks like our Fast Track organization, folks like our CSU organization, who can help agencies understand, here's where to start, here's what your dependencies are, here's where your gaps are still going to be if you deploy this technology, here's the capabilities that you may be able to get rid of or sunset as your contract expires to help you recover some of those costs. And quite honestly, here's the partners that have done this for us 1,000 times in the past and may already be inside of your organization. The other thing that I want to bring up as we have this conversation is when you look at this executive order, while there are a few things that are new to civilian, like, hey, let's actually begin kind of content labeling and understanding what's sensitive inside of your organization, which is something that DoD has done forever, right? And a lot of our large scale organizations like Microsoft have done forever. And now we're beginning to ask agencies to do this. But none of these things are really new technologies. And none of these things, quite honest, very few of these things are new requirements for federal government. So if we go back and we look at CDM and we look at the requirements of CDM and we look at the capabilities that are required and enforced by TIC 3.0, and we take a look at what's being asked. You look at TIC 3.0 and the requirements that they've got there, and you match that with CDM, you get zero trust. And you take the requirements that we have today for multi-factor authentication and the improved identity capabilities, and you ask yourself, HSPD 12 came out, what, 15 years ago? So there's not a lot of brand new things that they're asking us to do. They're just really asking us to do them at once and be cohesive about the way that we do it. Several folks have talked about in this session, how do we do this as a system? How do we make integration kind of native? And I do believe that's one of the differentiators at Microsoft. So it's why I would ask agencies to not necessarily do this on their own. As part of acquiring this system and a part of having this on contract, you get access to resources to help you understand how to apply it to your environment. So I would encourage people to use those and to understand that we can actually checkbox not just the EO, but several of these mandates if we deploy what they own.
Ken, some of the best organizations to partner with aren't only the ones helping organizations become more secure, they're the ones training them, right? Yeah. And I want to call that out as, anyone can be a partner, anyone can be an enabler, anyone can offer you a managed service or of some sort, but the ones that we see that are really successful understand the organization by partnering with them to train and empower their employees to do more, right? That fact that's in the window, I think it was like 3.5 million. And if you hear Ann Johnson at Microsoft, she's been sharing that for years, and it went from how are we going to fill the gap to listen, we're never going to be able to fill this gap. So how do we train individuals to do more without burning them out and keeping them within our organizations? And these organizations that we partner with to help you with the EO, to help you with your initiatives, are those same organizations that are going to empower your employees to learn and take it on themselves.
Absolutely.
Great.
And before we go to audience questions, I just kind of wanted to, piggyback on something that I think, Steve, you just said a few minutes ago, how unfair this fight is, how asymmetrical it is, right? I mean, we, the defenders, need to be right 100% of the time, all the time. And the bad actors, they only need to succeed once, right? It usually ends up on the front page of a newspaper. So it's super tough, and I'm glad that you guys are giving expert advice. And now, Nick, Andy, could you help me out with a couple of questions from the audience, please?
Absolutely. So the first question that we had was from Scott Brewster, who says, which should I get first to support the work that needs to be done? AZ500, SC200, SC900? I've not seen a government tenant properly secured yet, but most contract companies appear to have gone through the NIST requirements and have made the attempt. So would love to hear any recommendations from the panelists on where to start with scaling and how best to secure tenants.
So in the scaling, I'll start off since there's some silence here. Sarah actually put a great link into the window here. If you just scroll up a little bit, if you're following the chat conversation, go up a little bit higher. And what you'll see is cybersecurity resources and training. And we also have a link from the EO landing page that I shared earlier to where we have specific training resources. And so it'll give you a good look at the various certifications that you can get, as well as self-paced training related to content specifically called out within the EO. So would definitely, it's not a one size fits all. I don't know that we can recommend a specific cert to say this is the one you should go get. But take a look at those learning paths, and there's a really good explanation of each. And I think as you assess the ones that we find have the most relevance to the executive order, you can map that to your current environment and which ones you think will be most applicable. But filtering it down, because we do offer a ton of training, filtering it down to the ones that are most relevant is a great way to start. And so you can utilize that link off of the CyberEO landing page.
All right, Nick, any other questions?
Yeah, absolutely. So next question we have, actually, I believe Steve already answered this one in the chat. So if you want more context than what Steve gave in the chat, please feel free to speak up again. But the next one we have is, when will Microsoft update all of their services to ASB v2 or some future version? Many core services still align with the ASB v1, and they're still mapped to the CIS 7.1 controls. I expect it to be a moving target once CSA updated and CCM and CIS updates their framework to v8.
I'm going to phone a friend on that one. Sean, do you have line of sight to that?
I was going to pass to Sean as well.
Thanks, guys. Interrupt my dinner. Typically, most of the control evolution at its core, our baseline control framework is 853 on the internal application. And then we manage transitive libraries to each of the adaptations as the new standards are released. Those tend to honestly lag just based on manpower availability, right? They can lag anywhere from 2, 3, 4, 5 months, depending on the complexity of the review. That tends to be our challenge, though, right? Is we're trying to retain basically a simple snowflake model, where at its core is 853 is the baseline control set, and everything from that is a single transitive relationship to each other release that's made around the world, frankly, because we're also tracking to IT Grundschutz and then ITSG in Canada and MCTS in Asia, et cetera, et cetera. So there's always a lot of work in that pile. I don't have a hard time frame from you, but if it starts getting past 5, 6 months, escalate to somebody like myself, and I can try to track it down for you.
Great, thanks, Sean. The next question we have from the chat was, as the executive order continues to expand, do you expect it to follow suit with CMMC that would require more stringent guidelines around data management to reduce risk?
I mean, I can't dictate where the federal government's going to go next, but I do believe that just an initial recognition that we need to get our arms around that data for the first time ever in civilian was in this EO. I do think we're headed into a world where all enterprises, public sector or private, need to truly understand the sensitivity of their data, the systems in which that data resides, and put controls in place to be able to manage that. So will it be CMMC? I don't know. If others have a speculation on that, feel free to add, but I do feel like we're headed down a more stringent path. Absolutely.
I mean, I can just add to that briefly. I think as we look at the changes coming to the FAR, realize that the EO lands the first set of guidance and sort of that baseline, but there are a number of activities within the EO that over time get more specific. And so there will be additional changes to the FAR. There will be changes and requirements that land throughout the next 300 days. So really the requirements of the EO are transforming at a granular level. So will we see CMMC or similar aspects materialize as a result of that? Quite possibly, right? It's a framework that's received a lot of attention, a lot of work, and it could be more broadly applicable. So far, we don't have a crystal ball. We haven't seen anything on that, but it definitely makes sense. On the second half of the question, and to Kent's point, that focus on the data, when we typically look at a life cycle of data protection, information protection, we're looking at a discover, classify, monitor, protect, and really the EO gets partway into discovery, and that's about as far as it goes. It's a natural leap to go into classification from there, and not a very heavy lift. But as you start to look at some of the security measures for critical software, those require you to have a data inventory for all critical software, data interacting with critical software. So that sort of leads you down that path of you need to start now getting into classification. So while it doesn't call that out specifically, the assets that are being developed as a result of the EO are now beginning to require it. So I think you're going to see, even just tied to the work streams related to the EO, we're going to start looking at data classification and monitoring and data protection. I think that's just a natural evolution. Will there be future executive orders? Most likely. Will they revolve around that? Most likely. We'll probably also get some OT, as was brought up before, in future executive orders, as we've seen them in the past around critical infrastructure and operational technology. So I think it's ongoing, and each one will build on the work that was done in the last.
And I would actually add, Steve, not only in Kent, not only do we think that it will likely see that for those of us, and I think everybody on this call is in this industry focusing on this, I think we hope there is, right? I mean, we want to see that kind of guidance because we understand, again, how unfair the fight is. And if we assume breach, we need to assume breach not only at the, the sort of collaboration productivity level, we need to assume it at the data level as well. So, not only do we, assume it, we hope it, right? We'd like to see this stuff become secure, and we'd like to see a mandate for it to happen.
Question from Gary says, will double encryption be required per every industry's regulatory compliance, in your opinion, especially in the US?
I can speak to that briefly, gents, if you want me to.
Please.
This is Sean. We've seen a number of things happen in encryption just in the past couple of years. Yes, we've seen the ITAR rule change. We've seen a lot more folks asking about encryption as a independent or autonomous set of solution requirements. I'm a little uncomfortable with some of the discussion. I'm seeing a lot of the folks in some of these bodies aren't real technical people. They're policy writers. And I think they have kind of a myopic focus on the benefit of encryption and confidentiality with kind of no understanding of key management and other practices, et cetera, that should accompany that. So I'm a little leery of some of the discussion I'm seeing in different segments around that. That said, I expect it to continue to gather favor. Obviously, if you're tracking, Advance and even Microsoft Research is working on this, and you can follow up on our public sites on homomorphic encryption. If we make advantages or strides in a scalable implementation of that, I would expect a fundamental change in some of the encryption structures and requirements that we're seeing. What I would caution against is an over-reliance on encryption, as I think there's just been far too much reliance on that as a placebo under the umbrella of confidentiality protections. And I've actually seen, honestly, organizations I have talked to that have completely obviated their requirements around screening, and have dealt with things like they've had to deal with felons that had access to encrypted data in their environments, and not in our services, by the way. This is in their environments. Why? Because they were relying on encryption. And of course, the felon couldn't read the information, but that doesn't mean that it could stand up in court that some important information wasn't deleted out of the collection of information, right? And so there's some nuances there that I think will continue to need to receive a lot of attention before some of those rise to the top as really viable long-term solutions.
Interesting. And Sean, can I ask a follow-up question real quick?
Yeah.
All right. Do you think that advances in quantum computing present a real practical danger in a near future to all the different encryption schemes that we have implemented so far?
In the near future, if I were to define that as in the next couple of years, no.
5 to 10?
Yes. I would say within 5 to 10 to 15 years, in my anecdotal observations, I think you will start to see definitive threats. And I think what we will see in the industry is probably signal or telemetry on the increase of key rotation, increase of key strength, increase an extreme tightening down on devices, et cetera, in preparation around good intelligence that we might receive on advances in that. I do think that'll fundamentally change a lot of this fight, though.
Great, thank you.
Andrew, I'll add to Sean's comments just about the placebo of encryption. One of the things we looked at, even with end-to-end encryption, and there's whole conversations around that. I could probably hear Sean laughing even while on mute. Around end-to-end encryption, if you don't have a full zero trust strategy and you're not securing the device, Doesn't matter if you have end-to-end encryption, right? The easiest place to get access to the device, I've had conversations where we have particular clients that are concerned that servers are able to decrypt the data so that we can do transcription or things like that inside of the service. And it's like, well, where are you more concerned with the server that's in the cloud, that's hardened, that's single purpose and monitored for that, or your endpoint? What are you doing to secure that endpoint that even with end-to-end encryption is going to have access to that data? If your endpoint is owned, it doesn't matter what your encryption in transit scheme is. And so as we've sort of worked through that and talked through some of those things, it's a piece of the puzzle. It is definitely not the entire puzzle. So over-reliance on encryption, to Sean's point, can create some blind spots for you.
And that gets back, Steve, to what we talked about earlier, right? If if we do the easy things, but all we do is the easiest things and we're not comprehensive, right? All they have, we only, at one vulnerability, we're totally vulnerable, right? So we need to look at it much more holistically.
Absolutely. And I think some like old, I guess, lessons from the past do apply. I see someone, posting in a chat channel about defense in depth. I mean, this is concept that is as old as life, I think, pretty much. And if implemented properly, I think it can yield some, pretty good results. You don't rely too much on anything like I think Steve mentioned, over relying on encryption, for example. Well, encryption definitely wasn't intended just, for the purposes of, safeguarding, privacy. There are, many different uses for encryption, but we seem to use it as a, tool for just about anything and everything, right? When the, question comes up, in terms of security, and some say, well, can we encrypt it? Well, we can, but I'm sure there are other ways of doing it. And by the way, it should not be the only level of protection. And things do get compromised on the device level. And why do we still get compromises related to business email, for example, and phishing? How many years we have known about them, how many years we have spent, teaching our end users how to recognize those phishing attacks and act upon them. And still, it's an effective method to get inside your enterprise. So lots of things to do. Nick, any more questions? I mean, I see a lot of comments, not too many questions though.
Yeah, I don't see it in the chat, but definitely would love to encourage folks. If you want to come off mute and ask a question, please feel free. It doesn't just have to be in the chat.
Absolutely. Oh, while people are still thinking, can I ask any of the panelists, what do you guys see the sort of continued role of NIST with regards to this executive order? Is it focusing more on the guidance side? Is it like trying to spearhead some of those government to industry partnerships? Is there anything else that they can do to help us all?
I'm sure Sean will have some feedback on this one as well, but I will say, we've been working with NIST for over a year on what are the controls required in a zero trust framework. There's additional capabilities required in the EO that we've aligned with NIST on as well. We've done a lot of work lately. We have to think about how do we secure other systems. We've done a lot of work lately with what are even the security controls and capabilities in AI that may need to be modified and changed. A lot of folks, including Microsoft, using a lot of artificial intelligence in our security systems, working with NIST to understand what are those gaps, what are the de facto standards that exist in the open source community, what changes still need to be made or implemented. So I think they still have a highly defining role, and we're very closely working with them.
Excellent. Yeah, they produced such detailed guidance on so many, different subjects that, I mean, at times it's almost overwhelming, but it can actually, get you pretty far. I mean, if you don't really know where to start. And I was kind of trying to compare that with maybe a set of, principles coming out of the CMMC, as we have talked about as well. I do like CMMC's approach. I think that it's healthy to think of security not as on and off thing, but as a continuum of some sort, and there is a maturity level, and it's something that you need to practice all the time, right? It's not something that you kind of pass, put a check mark on, and then move on.
We do have a question from the chat. Alice asks, do you think that information sharing will be normalized with this executive order?
I think it will be much more encouraged and that there will be more incentive to do so. I'm a little bit shy around the term normalized for two reasons. Something we've learned over the past 10, 15 years as we've kind of evolved our own cloud services. And this is, by the way, I'm actually speaking on some of the work that we've done cross industry with Amazon and Google and others. It's a real challenge between sharing information on like known TTPs and potential evidence of certain patterns and sharing all information, right? There's a contextual puzzle piece to this that remains very challenging, where many parties want the data to have free field analysis of everything, but without the underlying context and the understanding of what is relevant in the architecture that generated that data, you often create more harm than good. And I think part of our struggle towards that information sharing will be coming up with the most effective models where you're sharing the intelligence derived by the information rather than the information itself. And I think as we get closer to those models, we'll start seeing some real value and some real traction, right? We'll see better early alerting. We'll see better risk and threat validation that, false signatures, these types of things. And until we kind of gain that traction and that acceptance and kind of help people evolve out of more of that legacy desire to have all of the base data to do their own analysis versus trusting that the derivative balance based on those who understand its contextual origin, I think that's really going to be kind of a pivot point in that evolution.
I'll answer to add on to Sean's points, talking about broad information sharing. I'll scope it down maybe a little bit to sharing about incidents. And if you scope it down to sharing about incidents either between DoD and civilian, or within civilian, or public-private and private-public sharing, I absolutely think it will move the needle in those areas because those are specifically called out and required. And knowing that contracts are being rewritten to include language that will require technology providers, CSPs, to have a baseline level of incident communication with the government. I think that will move the needle in that specific use case, in that specific slice. Now, what that looks like, how do we get more proactive? How do we get more broad? How do we share the threat intel and not just incidents, those types of things? I think that's to come. And as we nail down some of the things that work intra-government, my hope is that that will work for private public as well. And so, I think the EO is moving us in the right direction. But really just today, like, do we have broad awareness of incidents that happen? Does the government know when one agency is impacted? Is it reported, to CISA such that they can look across other agencies? And I think the incidents will drive the mechanism of what is the information that is now needed to do the assessment. So if we get the incidents, we'll get the information. And as we do enough of that routine, we'll start to normalize and find commonalities in the information that's required for various types of incident investigations. So my hope is we'll get there over time.
Excellent point. So I think that, yes, enhancing the threat information, sharing and exchange, intra-government as well as maybe between government and public, sector entities would definitely go a long way. And we in the industry can probably do better as well. I mean, I see and read a lot of different reports. Some of them are very thorough and good, coming from Verizon, from Microsoft, from Cloudflare, and a number of other companies. Yet we don't really have this sort of super comprehensive view of the world. And at some point in time, we may need to, work on doing this within the industry as well as within the government, and then finding an interface point of some sort. I was also wondering, since Steve, you mentioned, incidents, it's like one of the things that's also top of mind, especially with assuming breach approach. So we're assuming something is going to happen. So we do need to have a strict and pretty standard, playbook for responding to incidents. Do you guys see that as sort of, becoming a standard approach, having a standard playbooks for incident response that each and every agency organization can standardize on? Is there a value in it?
Absolutely. Well, since you mentioned my name, I'll answer, and then I'll answer briefly so that the other folks can chime in. But I think, it is called out with its own section in the EO, right? So I think very much top of mind in that there should be prescriptive guidance around what to do for various types of incidents. What are the best practices? Will there be some deltas within agencies? Absolutely. Within environments? Absolutely. But the standard framework is fairly common. And I think there needs to be industry participation in that as well. When it comes to hunting across Microsoft cloud properties, Microsoft is a great authority to tap into on that. When it comes to hunting across an AWS or a Cloudflare or whatever the case may be, the industry really needs to help establish those patterns, those playbooks, understanding that identity hunting inside of Azure AD, very different than identity hunting with IAM inside of AWS, just completely different animal. And they can't an analyst can't specialize in everything. So having that playbook so that you're able to work through it is absolutely essential, knowing that you have those best practices. There's a great project that was put together by our global black belt team, and it's for Azure Sentinel. And that specifically gives you the capability to inject best practice frameworks into the comments section of your incidents themselves. And so if you establish what a best practice is in a certain scenario, and you could pull that from CISA, you could write your own, you can pull that from Microsoft default that was done in collaboration with Microsoft Digital. You can pull those things and then staple them to incidents. And I think of it a lot like a pull request to tell a developer about a third-party vulnerability or a code vulnerability. Like, you have to do security the way the developer does. You got to get it into the build system right in front of them at the time of the build, get them a pull request. The same thing with, an analyst is in there looking at the incident. You have to put the guidance with the incident itself. It needs to be stapled in the comments. If you get the right things to do, the right people at the right times with clear guidance, we're going to significantly improve incident response.
Hey, Steve, I'm curious if you are thinking, with the board that the EO drives in terms of the post-event investigations, right? And that, and sort of either replacing what the FTC does today or, doing it themselves and having two investigations. It'll be interesting to see, and I'm interested what you think, whether or not that'll sort of be, will roll back, right? So the way that they end up doing these investigations and these post-event investigations will probably drive some of that standardization, right? So it'll kind of, the standardization will, come up and best practices will come up, but as they look at how these investigations will be done, people are going to want to be better prepared to respond to those investigations, right?
Absolutely. I think, and that's one of the concepts of sort of evidence-based best practices, that as we establish the requirement, now we can start to look at deltas. Now we can look at what are the commonalities. So that increased transparency is going to raise the bar, but it's also going to provide opportunity and channels to say what is working and what is that expectation. And I think that the blast radius of that will be much broader than just what's required in the EO.
And that's actually one of the sidebar things that in the EO people aren't talking very, very, very much in industry because they're so focused on the technology pieces. But we really haven't seen that with the FTC investigations today, right? But I think we might see it moving forward.
That's a great point.
All right. And as we look to wrap things up, I think, any parting thoughts? Quick, brief parting thoughts from any one of you guys? All of you guys? Who wants to go first?
I'll start. We spoke about a lot today. One of my asks to everyone here in the forum is, if you need something from us, if there's something we are not doing, if there's something that we need to align better with you on, let us know. Be vocal about it. Our approach here to the EO and with our partners is not to give you the Microsoft approach, but to adopt your approach and build around that. And that's really what we're trying to do here. So please be transparent and vocal with us. That's why we're here. And, we're anxious to innovate together with you, especially utilizing something like the EO as our center focal point of where we collaborate.
I'll add that I think over the years, the vast majority of agencies have attempted to take on at least pieces and parts of this at some point. But if we got 80% of the way down the road and didn't close all the endpoints or didn't provide the right level of identity for every account, then we still have ourselves, vulnerable. So, we want to work with you to make sure that we close the door all the way, and that you use your investments, quite honestly, to the best of their ability to help protect you. And so, as Vishal said, lean on us, utilize us, let us help you. That's what we're here to do. There's several thousand people in Microsoft Federal alone who are eager to help you. So please reach out. Thank you for the time today. And we're really looking forward to helping everyone be successful.
Kent, I can't believe I have to follow that. That was much better than what I was going to say. I should have let you go last. I would just add that one thing we did not talk about a lot in this session is Section 4 of the executive order around things like SBOM and supply chain integrity. We mentioned in a couple of cases, but since this is an M365 meetup, I do want to let you know that the M365 team is heavily engaged in meeting the requirements of the EO, even before they are completely cemented. So not just in participation with NIST and in participation with NTIA and others, but when it comes to supply chain security of M365, both from the cloud perspective, also our bits that you deploy on your endpoints, comprehensively looking at M365 and all of our Microsoft software, that we are deeply engaged on how do we take supply chain integrity to the next level. We're engaged in it on a research basis, in our build systems, engineering, what is the path so that all Microsoft software can take advantage of hardened build processes, attestation of security, attestation of compliance, all of that policy creation, and even evangelizing the security development lifecycle more broadly so that other organizations can use it, and developing first-party tech for other cloud providers, for other software development shops. If you're a 10-person ISV that makes software for the federal government, Microsoft is going to help enable your compliance with the EO. So we're focused not only on our own compliance, of which M365 is really leading the way, and Azure Global as well, but also how do we help others in the industry, all technology providers, to raise the bar for a secure supply chain.
Excellent. Steve, do you mind closing it all up?
Yeah, sure. That's no pressure. I'll just say the EO is a part of the story. It is not the story. It is the headline, but there's a lot more details underneath that. Work with, your organization, work with companies like Planet, my organization, work with your Microsoft folks, take a look at what you own, be open to the things that you should be owning, that you don't own today. Take a look at how you can make these things operational in your environment, and where necessary, ask for help. As a community, that's for the customer base. For the community, let's work together. This is in our national security best interests, and we need to find a way to work together to fight this fight, this unfair fight. And we look forward to the opportunity to do so.
With that said, I would like to thank our distinguished panelists for the time that they contributed to this, for the experiences and thoughts that they have shared. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nick, do you want to do a close out?
Absolutely want to plus one that, Andrew. Thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you to Sean, our unplanned panelist, but some great contributions and thoughts shared. And definitely huge thank you to all of our attendees and members of our community. Given that we're a little over time, I'm going to kind of skip some of the informal details, but definitely want to ask everyone if you have a chance to fill out the feedback form, and look forward to seeing you at our session next month in August. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you all.